Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Kevin was a man defined by quiet resolve. His story began in a humble town, where, at just 18 years old, he used the modest savings he'd earned working alongside his uncle to launch a small auto repair shop. Though he lacked formal education, Kevin's dedication and exceptional talent set him apart. Over time, his modest enterprise grew into a successful business that catered to everything from luxury vehicles to routine car repairs. Outwardly, Kevin seemed to have crafted an idyllic life. His tireless efforts had afforded him a stable and fulfilling existence, but his greatest pride was his family. At the center of Kevin's universe was his wife Avery, whom he had met at a local car show. At the time, she was a driven law student with a bright future ahead. From their first meeting, Kevin was drawn to her. Avery embodied everything Kevin admired. She was smart, ambitious, and fiercely self-reliant. Their relationship quickly blossomed into a whirlwind romance. Within a year, they were married, and soon after, they welcomed 2 children into their lives. Their eldest, Sarah, was now pursuing a degree in business, while Jason, their youngest, was chasing his dreams as a musician in a local rock band. For 25 years, Kevin had been the bedrock of his family, steady, selfless, and deeply committed. He never sought recognition, preferring to let his actions speak for his devotion. Kevin found contentment in the simplicity of his life, running his business in the same town where it all began. Avery, however, had changed over the years. She had earned her law degree, climbed the ladder at a prestigious firm, and fully embraced the demands of her high-powered career. At first, Kevin admired her drive, but subtle shifts in their relationship began to emerge. Initially, the changes were easy to overlook: longer hours at the office, weekend work trips, and less time spent at home. Kevin, understanding her ambitions, didn't complain, but as the months passed, her growing distance and preoccupation became impossible to ignore. Then came the arrival of Avery's new boss. Although she rarely mentioned him, Kevin couldn't help but notice the clues: extended workdays, overly courteous text messages, and vague explanations about her schedule. Something felt off. Trusting his intuition, Kevin started paying closer attention. One evening, unable to hold back any longer, he confronted her after finishing his shift at the garage. "We need to talk," he said firmly, his voice calm but unwavering. "Why are you working late so often? We used to have dinner together every night, and now I can't even remember the last time we sat down as a family." Caught off guard, Avery hesitated. Her usual justifications felt hollow under Kevin's piercing gaze. "It's just work," she said weakly. "Things have been really hectic." Kevin wasn't satisfied. "I know what hard work looks like, Avery. I've spent my life building something from nothing, but this isn't just about your career, is it? I've seen the messages, the late-night calls. Who's texting you at 2 in the morning? Her composure faltered, and guilt flickered across her face. I can explain," she began, but Kevin cut her off. "Then explain," he demanded, "because I'm done pretending nothing's wrong." Reluctantly, Avery confessed. "It's Nicholas, my boss. We've grown close because of work, but it's not what you think. It's complicated." Her words confirmed Kevin's worst fears. "Complicated?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been married for 25 years, Avery. I know when something's wrong. This isn't just work." Tears filled Avery's eyes as she broke down. "I never meant for this to happen. Nicholas makes me feel important in a way I haven't felt in years. He listens to me. He sees me." Kevin felt as though the world had been ripped out from under him. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice heavy with pain. "Everything we've built means nothing to you?" Avery's silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her admission that she felt unfulfilled and wanted something more was like a dagger to Kevin's heart. He stood there, motionless, struggling to process the weight of her words. In the weeks that followed, their home was suffused with tension. Avery's absences became more frequent, and her indifference more pronounced. Kevin wrestled with a maelstrom of emotions, rage, heartbreak, and a profound sense of betrayal. It felt as though the life he had built was crumbling around him. Despite his anguish, Kevin chose not to act impulsively. He sought refuge in his garage, the one place where he still felt in control. But this time, his work wasn't just about fixing cars. Beneath the surface, his thoughts grew darker, consumed by a desire for retribution, not impulsive revenge, but something deliberate and calculated. As Avery continued to drift further away, her nights increasingly spent with work or with Nicholas, Kevin made a decision. He wouldn't let her dismantle the life they had built without facing the consequences. His love for her still lingered, but it was now overshadowed by a cold determination. Avery may have moved on, but Kevin wasn't ready to relinquish the life they had shared, or the man he had become. Not this time. Kevin had crafted a plan, and this time it would be Avery who would beg for understanding. She needed to confront the weight of her actions, to grasp the ripple effects of her betrayal. On a Thursday evening, Kevin set his strategy in motion. He had spent weeks meticulously orchestrating every element, preparing for the moment when he would finally take control. Kevin knew exactly how to proceed. His garage, a business he had built from the ground up, symbolized more than just income. It was his independence, his hard work, and his pride. Now, it would become the linchpin in his campaign against Avery. The changes started subtly, almost invisibly. He replaced the locks on the house, canceled her credit cards, and began to slowly strip away the conveniences she had always taken for granted. At first, Avery remained oblivious. Preoccupied with her affair and her new life with Nicholas, she failed to notice the ground shifting beneath her feet. The confrontation Kevin had planned arrived sooner than she anticipated. Late one evening, after yet another excuse about long hours at work, Avery walked through the door to find Kevin waiting in the living room. His expression was inscrutable. He had already begun dismantling her life piece by piece, but tonight would mark the decisive turning point. "Avery," Kevin began, his tone calm but razor-sharp. "Do you even realize what you've done? Do you think you can abandon this marriage, toss aside everything we've built together, and run off with Nicholas without facing the consequences? You're wrong." Avery crossed her arms defensively. "I've made it clear, Kevin. I'm done with this. I don't need this life, and I don't need you." Kevin's gaze hardened. "You may think you've moved on, but you're still living in a world where you assume you can take what you want and leave nothing but ruin behind. That stops here. You're not walking away with the years of my loyalty, my hard work, or everything I've sacrificed for you." The air in the room grew dense with tension. For the first time, Avery's confidence faltered. Kevin was no longer the man pleading for answers or reconciliation. His demeanor had transformed into something cold, methodical, and unyielding. "Kevin," Avery began, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't want to fight. I've made my choice. I'm with Nicholas now." Kevin took a step closer, his presence looming like a thundercloud. "This isn't a fight, Avery. This is what you've earned." With deliberate precision, Kevin handed her the divorce papers. But this wasn't a simple legal document. It was the culmination of his plan. He had worked tirelessly with his lawyers, ensuring that every clause left Avery with nothing but the bare essentials. The house, the assets, the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to, all stripped away. "Here's how this plays out," Kevin explained, his tone icy. "You want freedom? Fine. But it comes at a price. The garage, mine. The house, mine. The money. You won't see a cent of it. You can keep your jewelry, but that's it. And as for Nicholas, he'll find out what happens when he crosses me." Avery's face paled as the reality sank in. You can't do this. You can't take everything from me. Kevin's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. I already have. Your accounts are frozen, your cards are canceled, and the house is in my name. You're free to leave, but you'll do so with nothing. That's the price of betrayal. Stunned, Avery's voice trembled. You're out of your mind. This isn't right. Kevin's expression remained unmoved. Right? I gave you 25 years of my life. I built a life for us while you threw it all away. You don't get to walk out unscathed. Actions have consequences, and now you're facing yours. His words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. Avery stood frozen, absorbing the full impact of Kevin's calculated retribution. She had underestimated him, assuming she could leave him behind without repercussions. She had been wrong. The days that followed were a blur of legal battles and desperate phone calls to her attorney. But Kevin had been thorough, leaving no loophole for Avery to exploit. She was left with nothing but the clothes on her back. Meanwhile, Kevin made good on his promise. He contacted Nicholas directly, delivering a stern warning. The fallout was swift and devastating. Kevin, leveraging his business acumen, quietly dismantled Nicholas's life. Legal issues mounted, his business ventures failed, and his reputation crumbled. Avery could only watch as her carefully constructed new life disintegrated before her eyes. She had believed she could trade Kevin's loyalty for something better, but now she was left to confront the wreckage of her choices. Kevin, however, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. His revenge had been precise and unrelenting, leaving Avery with nothing but regret. Yet as Kevin stood in his garage, surrounded by the fruits of his labor, a lingering emptiness remained. His actions had restored balance and reclaimed his life, but they couldn't erase the void left by the woman he had once loved. Still, he took solace in the knowledge that he had taken back control. The betrayal no longer defined him, and as the weeks turned into months, Kevin moved forward, leaving the past firmly in his rearview mirror. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. That was the final disagreement Arya and I would ever have, unfolding right after she received the divorce papers. Even as we crossed the threshold into the courtroom, we both clung tightly to our masks. I played the part of the husband desperate to save what was left, though the investigator's damning photograph of her locking lips with Barney King had already sealed our fate. By the time I had finished watching those first moments of the incriminating footage, the death knell of our marriage had sounded, and I was the one shoveling dirt onto its grave. As for Arya, her intentions remained as cryptic as ever. Perhaps she believed her affair could still be negotiated, that we might find some bizarre middle ground, a twisted arrangement where she'd remain married to me while keeping Barney on the side. Such a notion would be quintessential Arya Clark, my wife of 27 years. Barney wasn't just any man either. He was one of her subordinates, and Arya had always been a maestro at orchestrating impossible situations with a chilling calm, both in her professional life and our personal one. Throughout our marriage, Arya's refrain had always been, "Grant, be reasonable." After the divorce papers arrived, however, she swapped that line for a new one. Fragile male ego, as in, "Grant, this isn't about me or Barney, it's about your fragile male ego." I despised those words, but before we could dig too deeply into that particular argument, she deflected with her trademark ease. "Grant, if you'd just get over your fragile male ego, you'd see this isn't a threat. It doesn't mean we have to end things." Her smile was practiced, disarming. "I don't love him. Give it a few months and he'll be a distant memory. You and I can still have our happy ending." I'll hand it to her. Arya's audacity was unmatched. She sat at the kitchen table, her fingers absently tracing the stem of her favorite wine glass, half filled with an Australian Chardonnay. Beside it rested a manila folder containing my divorce petition and the damning photos. The evidence was there, glaringly undeniable, but she continued as if oblivious to the gravity of the situation. The scene reminded me of the Titanic after it struck the iceberg. The orchestra might as well have been playing "Nearer, My God, to Thee," as Arya calmly proposed, steering the wreckage back to port. To her, this was still a negotiation. To me, it was over. I had no energy left for compromise or debate. "Let's pause here," I interrupted her, cutting through her well-rehearsed speech. "You keep throwing around this idea of my fragile male ego, as if it explains everything. What exactly do you mean by that?" She frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "It's straightforward, Grant. You're insecure. You're afraid of competition, scared you won't measure up." Her smile returned, soft and pitying. "But you don't have to worry. You're still my man, my guy." "And Barney?" I pressed. She waved the question away as though it were trivial. "Barney is just a distraction, like a treadmill or a set of weights. He's not replacing you. I'm not planning to stop loving you. There's no real threat." I gave her a look, a mixture of disbelief and faint disapproval, the kind husband's perfect over years of marriage to avoid escalating a fight. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You think my issue is that I'm afraid you'll stop loving me? That you'll trade me in for someone better or younger?" She nodded, her smile widening. "Exactly. That's why you're so defensive. But you don't need to be. You're enough for me, Grant. And this vulnerability you keep talking about, you think it's because I'm a man?" She reached out and patted my arm in that infuriatingly patronizing way. "Oh, honey, it's not just you. All men have fragile egos. It's what we wives do. We bolster our husbands, keep their confidence intact." Her smile broadened as though she'd just shared some profound universal truth. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Arya had always been a fan of simplistic pop psychology that framed women as inherently stronger than men. Debating her wasn't worth the effort, but after 27 years, I was finally done letting this nonsense slide. "Arya, you've been throwing that phrase around for years," I said, fixing her with a steady gaze. "And every time, I've let it go. I've picked my battles. But if there's one thing I want you to understand, it's just how ridiculous this argument is." She opened her mouth to reply, but I held up a hand to stop her. The idea of the fragile male ego exists because it's unexpected. Think about it. How often do you see a man get hit where it hurts the most? It's a trope in every comedy skit. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Plenty of times. And it's funny, isn't it? Because men are supposed to be tough, and seeing one brought low is ironic. The big, strong guy reduced to a ball on the floor, gasping for air." She smiled faintly, conceding the point. "Now imagine the same thing happening to a woman. It's not funny, is it?" She shook her head. "No, that's violence." "Exactly, because women are perceived as fragile. Seeing a woman in pain isn't entertaining, it's upsetting. And it's the same with this so-called ego. At work, my friends mock everything about me. My weight, my hairline, even my performance in bed. Imagine if your friends did that to you." Her face twisted in shock. "Women don't do that to each other." "Exactly. But for us, it's normal. We take it because we have to. The only place I've ever felt safe letting my guard down is here, at home, with you. What you call my fragile male ego is just me being human with the one person I thought I could trust." Her confident smile faltered, and she seemed ready to argue but stopped herself. "That's the real issue, Arya," I continued. "You were supposed to be my safe harbor, but you're not. Not anymore. I started noticing the cracks 6 months ago. The way you looked at me, the little jabs about my body, the growing distance between us. Even before Barney, you weren't my partner anymore." Her eyes glistened, threatening tears. Grant. I shook my head, cutting her off. I tried, Arya. I planned trips, complimented you, did everything I could to remind you how much you mattered to me. But it didn't make a difference. You'd already checked out. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. For the first time, I felt like my words had finally struck home. I started paying more attention to my appearance, dressing sharply and addressing the small details I had once overlooked. Regular trips to the gym became routine, fueled by the hope that you might remember the version of me you once loved. But as I glanced down at my hands, I realized it was futile. Whatever I was trying to salvage no longer held any meaning. I wouldn't allow myself to cry in front of you. Vulnerability felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. You began making excuses to cancel plans, avoiding trips we once anticipated. When I complimented your outfits, your face would stiffen, as though you were calculating whether I'd figured out who you were dressing for. And when I sent flowers to your office, there was only silence, no response, no acknowledgement. Then came the arguments. You seemed to pick fights deliberately, crafting them to sidestep intimacy. It became glaringly clear that I had failed to rekindle what we once had. The connection we shared had faded, and as much as it pained me to admit it, you were no longer special to me either. While I never stooped to instigating fights just to avoid you, I often found myself inwardly groaning, wondering how things had deteriorated to this point. Arya, I said quietly one evening, can't you just be honest? Not with me, if that's too much to ask, but at least with yourself. You looked up briefly, your eyes meeting mine before dropping again to your hands. Hands I once thought so elegant, now trembling ever so slightly. I shrugged. Yes, I'll admit my pride took a hit. I spent hours behind closed doors at work, mourning what we were losing. I tried to project strength, hiding behind the professional facade I'd perfected, so you wouldn't see how deeply you'd hurt me. I began finding reasons to leave the house, small excuses to avoid staying in the same space with someone who could wound me so effortlessly. Your expression registered surprise, but I simply smiled faintly and rested a hand on yours. You might be pleased to hear, I added, that my pride has healed. I've found other sources of validation, other people and things that remind me I have value. You searched my face for answers, as if trying to piece together what I was saying. No, I said, preempting the question forming on your lips. I never cheated on you, but I couldn't help noticing that some women at the gym didn't seem disgusted by me anymore. By the time I'd gathered enough clarity to speak with a lawyer, my fragile ego was nothing more than a distant memory. Are we finished here? I asked, believing I'd said everything that needed saying. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd finally understood. But I had forgotten one crucial detail. I was married to an attorney. You never surrendered without a fight. Grant, this is unnecessary, you began, your voice rising with emotion. Yes, I've been distracted, but I never stopped loving you. In my heart, you've always been my number one. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I didn't realize how delicate you were. You kept talking, weaving an intricate web of apologies and explanations, as you've always done so well. But one word snagged my attention. Delicate. You still didn't understand. And at that moment, I knew you likely never would. My patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. Arya, stop, I interrupted, my voice sharp with frustration. After a measured breath, I continued. You're missing the point. This isn't about some fragile male ego. But Grant, you interjected, everyone's ego is fragile, especially men. I leaned forward, my tone edged with exasperation. Arya, listen to me. For the past 27 years, I've tried to be honest with you while sparing your feelings. Every time you asked if your lipstick worked or whether a dress suited you, I had to carefully balance truth with diplomacy. I couldn't let you walk out looking ridiculous, but I also couldn't risk wounding you. Your eyes widened, unaccustomed to such bluntness. When I said, Maybe that lipstick doesn't go with your blouse, or suggested you change because I wasn't thrilled about the neighbor's stares. I was giving you an escape. I let you think my words stemmed from insecurity, that my so-called fragile ego was at fault. Do you know why? You shook your head, visibly perplexed. Because I wanted to protect you. Even when you dismissed my comments as trivial, I worked to shield you. Yes, I've made mistakes, like the time I said your eyeshadow was too bold or admitted that a dress didn't flatter you. And how did you react? With tears, cold thanks, and weeks of frosty silence. Anger flashed briefly in your eyes as you stared at me. So you've been lying to me for 27 years? Selective truth, I replied dryly. I told you you were the most beautiful woman in the world, that your efforts at the gym made you look ageless, that you outshone any goddess. I meant those words because I loved you. But now, let's be honest, Arya. You have stretch marks. Your body isn't the same. Your creams don't erase the wrinkles, and your hair is turning gray. You gasped, stunned by the rawness of my words. Remember how you're feeling right now, I said. That's what I've been enduring for months. Imagine if I told you I'd been with a younger woman, someone flawless, eager, and untouched by time. How would your ego survive then? Your face paled, your voice barely audible as you murmured, "Not well." Exactly. That's what you never grasped. I know you're not the most beautiful woman in the world, but to me, you were. I saw every imperfection and cherished them because they told our story. Your stretch marks, they nourished our children. Your hips, they carried them. Those wrinkles, they came from years of laughter we shared. I loved every flaw. Tears streamed down your face, but your chin remained raised, defiant. And now, you asked, your voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. A part of me wanted to deliver the final blow, to leave you reeling and desperate for understanding. But that wasn't the purpose of this conversation anymore. Taking a deep breath, I allowed my words to settle between us, the weight of them hanging heavy in the silence. This was never truly about Arya. Staring into the mirror, she saw time slipping away and clung to the illusion that recapturing her youth lay in the arms of a younger man. When everything fell apart, she masked her vulnerability with biting remarks and a pretense of self-assurance. But now, the truth is evident to both of us. She is fragile, diminished, and destined to face solitude in the end. As for me, I shed my tears long before, safely hidden in the confines of my office, parked in my car, or sitting quietly in a secluded park not far from home. I spent months burying the pain caused by her betrayal, struggling with the crumbling remains of our marriage, and eventually mourning its death. Once the storm passed, I knew it was time to consider what came next. My first step was to confront a question. Who did I want to become? Could I stoop to exploiting her vulnerability, claiming some hollow victory over a woman who had already dismantled her own life? No, that was not the man I aspired to be. I resolved to choose compassion over cruelty, integrity over pettiness. I wanted to see in myself a man who valued honesty and dignity. Drawing a deep breath, I placed my hand gently over Arya's. What did I see now? A woman who had once been part of my most cherished memories. Someone who had held my trust, until that trust was irrevocably broken. I gave her hand a soft squeeze. In her, I saw someone I would genuinely miss. She stood, attempting a smile that wavered and faltered, failing to mask the tears welling in her eyes. It doesn't have to end this way, she murmured. But it did. We can't turn back, I said, exhaling slowly. You're right about one thing. I'm not weak. But my trust? That was delicate. And now it's gone. I'll never be able to take off the armor I've had to put on. I can't let you back in, I continued. We might try again, live under the same roof, share a bed, take trips, build new memories. But I'd always feel like I had to look over my shoulder. I'd always wonder, is she judging me? Comparing me to someone else? Staying because she loves me, or because it's the easier choice? That's not true, she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head. I can't live like that, Arya. I still have years ahead of me, and I can't spend them in a relationship devoid of trust, pretending I'm safe when I'm not. I don't deserve that. And if you truly loved me, you wouldn't want me to endure it either. Though she had built a career on crafting compelling arguments, Arya couldn't hide her thoughts from me. I watched her silently weigh her options, running through possible retorts, searching for one that could change my mind. And then, I saw the moment it hit her. There was nothing left to fight for. Her gaze dimmed, the fight extinguished. Once she stopped resisting, the divorce moved quickly. Jewelry was traded for tools, the television and furniture went to her, and I took my half-restored Mustang. The house was sold, the proceeds split evenly, and we avoided exorbitant legal fees. What's strange about divorce is how it lingers. Even after the paperwork is signed, it's not truly over. Arya and I still cross paths at our children's birthdays, during holidays, and at family milestones. Sometimes she arrives with a date. For the past year, I've been bringing someone too. It's been the same woman, and the glint in Arya's eyes tells me she knows exactly what that means. I try to temper my pride, but every so often, I indulge in a sliver of it. Maybe my ego hasn't fully healed just yet. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.